Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. Tonight, I'm sharing 7 deeply unsettling stories from Utah's national parks and the lonely country around them. Places of red stone, dry washes, narrow canyons, and the kind of silence that starts to feel like a warning if you stay in it too long. If you're listening in the dark, maybe keep a light on nearby. Story 1. Zion in late October has this kind of beauty that almost feels unfair. The cottonwoods go yellow along the river, the cliffs catch the last light and turn the color of old embers, and even the air smells clean in a way city air never does. I'd been putting off that trip for weeks because work kept swallowing my weekends. And by the time I finally drove down, my cheap motel coffee tasted like burnt plastic. One of my new boots had already rubbed a raw spot on my heel, and the sunscreen cap in my glove compartment had cracked and leaked over a packet of almonds and half a gas station receipt. None of that mattered much. I'd gone out there because I wanted a quiet day with my camera and no one texting me to revise anything. I'd picked Hop Valley because it looked less crowded than the main routes. The little visitor contact station I stopped at was almost empty. A man named Orrin Prout was working the desk. Older guy, pale lashes, looked like he'd spent 40 years squinting into sun. He asked where I was headed, and when I told him, he hesitated just a second too long. Not enough for me to turn around, just enough that I noticed. He said, "If somebody calls to you off trail, make sure you see who it is first." I laughed because I thought he was kidding. He didn't laugh back. Then he started talking about washouts and muddy sections like that first thing hadn't happened. The trail itself was easy at first. Soft dirt, rabbit brush, that dusty sweet smell sage gets when the sun's on it. My camera strap kept sliding off one shoulder. A granola bar had melted in my pack and glued itself to the wrapper. Somewhere behind me, I could hear a family for a while, a kid asking every 30 seconds how much farther. Normal sounds, good sounds, then those faded out. That was the first point, I think, or maybe it happened earlier and I only noticed it there. The quiet changed, not louder, not sharper, just thinner somehow, like the canyon had swallowed all the soft edges out of it. I came around a bend and saw a wet handprint on the sandstone wall. At first, I honestly thought it was runoff. Just one dark mark where somebody had leaned after slipping, but when I stepped closer, I saw it was too high. I'm 5'7", and even reaching, I was nowhere near it. 12 feet up, maybe a little more. 5 streaked fingers, clear as if someone had pressed a muddy palm flat against the stone and then dragged it down an inch. I stood there longer than I want to admit. Then I told myself a climber had done it, some parkour idiot maybe, or kids boosting each other. People do dumb things outdoors all the time. I took a picture and kept going. The wash narrowed and there were places where the trail braided through damp patches and reeds. I remember kneeling to retie my right boot because the lace had gotten gummy with mud. I remember finding an empty orange Gatorade cap by a cottonwood root. Useless details, but they're still there in my head. Then, from somewhere ahead of me, I heard my mother say my name. Not yell it, just say it the way she used to when I was little and had wandered into the next aisle at the grocery store. Calm, slightly annoyed. "Lena." I went completely still. My mother was in Boise. She had never been to Zion in her life. And for a second, and this is the part I hate admitting, my first thought wasn't "that's impossible." My first thought was "how is she here?" Then my brain started doing what brains do. Echoes, another hiker with a similar voice, somebody talking into a phone. These canyon walls play tricks. I said that to myself twice, maybe 3 times, while every muscle in my neck stayed tight. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I should have turned back then, I know that, but nothing had happened yet that I couldn't explain away if I worked at it. A little farther on, the trail crossed a shallow run of water, and that was where I saw the second handprint, not on stone, on the inside of a cottonwood trunk where the bark had peeled away pale and smooth. Same size, same drag at the fingers, high enough that I had to tilt my head back. That put something dry and metallic in my mouth. I stopped taking pictures after that. I just carried the camera in one hand and kept scanning the trail, which probably made me look ridiculous, turning in little half circles every few steps. I told myself I was spooking because of that stupid warning from Orin. That's all. A suggestion gets in your head and suddenly every shadow has intentions. Then I heard my own voice, not behind me, ahead. A short, breathy laugh, mine exactly. The kind I make when I'm nervous and trying not to show it. There's no good way to explain what that did to me. My stomach didn't drop. It kind of clenched and held, like something had reached in and grabbed it in a fist. I stepped off the trail without meaning to and nearly slid in mud. When I looked up, I saw somebody standing through the reeds, maybe 40 feet away. Slim, human height, motionless. I could only see from shoulder to knees between the cattails. I almost called out again, then it shifted and I realized the arms were hanging too low, not by much, just enough that the fingertips brushed the tops of the reeds without bending. I crouched right there in mud and cold water and told myself, person on a slope, visual distortion, perspective. I was still doing that while my hands started to shake. The thing tilted its head, not curious, not animal, more like it was listening to a sound I couldn't hear. And then, in my mother's voice again, it said, very softly, "You don't need to hide from me." I don't remember deciding to move. One second I was crouched there and the next I was belly down behind a tangle of roots where a cottonwood had tipped sideways years earlier. Mud soaked through both knees. My camera knocked against a root hard enough to crack the lens filter. I covered my own mouth because my breathing had gotten ugly and loud. It came closer by sound first, not footsteps exactly. Wet dragging sounds, reeds ticking. Slow, measured, like it knew running would be wasted effort. I made the mistake of looking. It stood on the other side of the root mass, no more than 8 feet away. The skin, if that's what it was, looked pale and damp, stretched thin over its shoulders. Where its face should have had a mouth, there was only a vertical seam from under the nose to the point of the chin. It stayed closed while it looked around, smooth as clay. Then it opened sideways. I know how stupid that sounds. Sideways. Like the line had been cut wrong and the whole lower half peeled apart toward one cheek while my mother's voice came out of it. "Lena." I bit the inside of my mouth so hard I tasted blood. It lowered one arm over the root ball and groped across the dirt with long, wet fingers. The nails weren't sharp. That almost made it worse. They were blunt and pale and human-looking right up until the knuckles, which bent too many ways. One finger brushed the strap of my pack. That snapped me loose. I shoved backward, left the camera half pinned in mud, and crawled under the roots through a space that tore my jacket and ripped skin off my wrist. I heard it lurch after me, not fast, but suddenly not slow either. I got to my feet in the wash and ran downstream without trying to stay on trail. Branches slapped my face. One boot filled with water. I lost my hat. I remember thinking, absurdly, that was my good hat. I stayed low whenever the canyon bent. I crossed water twice because some animal part of me thought it might lose me if the ground got confused. Once I slipped and cracked my shin on a rock. Once I heard my own voice just behind my ear say, "Don't." By then I wasn't trying to make sense of anything. I was just moving. I reached the trailhead at dusk. There was nobody there except my car and a white pickup I never got a good look at because my hands were shaking too hard to fit the key into the lock on the first try. I got in, locked every door, and didn't even pull away right away. I just sat there with both palms on the wheel listening. Nothing hit the car, nothing spoke. I drove back to Springdale with mud drying on my jeans in stiff patches. At the motel sink, I found a smear of black silt inside my sleeve where something had touched my wrist. I could have gotten that from the wash. I told myself that. I said it out loud. The next morning before I left Utah, I walked out to the car and found a muddy handprint on the inside of the passenger window. Inside, same height as the ones on the canyon wall. I never got my camera back. I thought about going to report it, maybe even going with a ranger to look, but every time I pictured that trail, my throat went tight, so I went home. I told people I had a bad fall and cut the trip short. I still hike. Less than I used to, but I do. I don't go anywhere if someone jokes about voices carrying strange. And if somebody calls my name on an empty trail now, I make sure I can see their face before I answer. Story 2. Bryce Canyon never looked real to me, not even before what happened. The hoodoos down there look like something half-finished, like a city built by a patient person who got distracted and walked away. Juniper Cade had wanted to shoot sunrise there for years, and I finally said yes because she wore me down the way old friends can. We drove in the night before with a trunk full of camera gear, a grocery bag of stale cheese crackers, 2 trekking poles that never adjusted to the same height, and 1 paper map that had a coffee ring over the southern loop. My name's Graham Pell, and I'm the kind of person who usually needs 3 reasons before I believe 1 bad feeling. Juniper was the opposite. She trusted her nerves more than I trusted facts, which meant she was uncomfortable before I was. We camped near the rim, and she mentioned over instant noodles that a volunteer at the check-in board had told her not to be caught below the rim after dark if weather moved in. Not because of flash floods. The volunteer had apparently said, "Things look different down there once the shadows line up." I told her that sounded like Utah tourism trying to be spooky. She shrugged. Maybe. In the morning, frost had silvered the picnic table. My socks were still damp from washing them in a sink and hanging them badly. Juniper had a bright orange knit hat pulled over one ear because she said it made her look less like a nature documentary. We packed more lenses than food, which says a lot about both of us, and started down the trail while the first sun was still only hitting the top edges of the formations. It was beautiful. That's the annoying part. You want ugly places to hold ugly things. Bryce was all pink stone and blue cold sky, and ravens sounding smarter than everybody. The first weird thing was easy to ignore. We passed a hoodoo with something white embedded in the side of it, and Juniper stopped so fast I nearly hit her. At a glance, I thought it was quartz. Then I saw the shape, teeth, not a whole jaw, not anything dramatic like that, just 6 or 7 teeth pressed into the red rock in a neat curve, freshly bright, like someone had pushed a smile into wet clay and left it there. Human-looking, though I'm not an expert. Too square to be animal. Juniper whispered, "Nope." I bent close because of course I did, and saw little roots around them, thin as thread, growing from gaps in the stone. I said it had to be some prank installation. Artists do things in parks, or vandals, or a weird erosion pattern with bone trapped in it from forever ago. I heard myself sounding smarter than I felt. We moved on. The under-the-rim sections get quiet in a different way than Zion. Sound doesn't disappear, it bounces. A pebble falling somewhere far off keeps arriving in pieces. Around midday, we started hearing taps from across the amphitheater, 3 close together. Then 1 farther away, then 2 from behind us. Juniper said it sounded like someone moving around us. I said frost and thaw make rocks crack. Sun warming stone, totally normal. She looked at me and said, "It's noon." That shut me up for a minute. We ate tortillas with peanut butter on a flat spot above a drop. Mine had picked up lint inside the bag somehow. Juniper kept looking over her shoulder toward a cluster of hoodoos that all leaned the same direction. One of them seemed to have a darker crown than the others, almost burnt black at the top. She asked if I remembered passing it before. I said no, but every formation down there starts blending after a while. By late afternoon, clouds had moved in, thin at first, then thicker. Light flattened. The colors drained out a little. We should have turned up toward the rim earlier, but we did that hiker thing where you shave 10 minutes in your head until an hour has disappeared. Then Juniper grabbed my arm so hard her nails bit through my sleeve. About 30 yards off trail, between two narrow spires, stood a hoodoo that hadn't been there a second earlier. I know how that sounds. I know places like Bryce are made to confuse distance and shape. But I'd been looking straight at that gap because a raven had landed near it. Open space, raven, stone wall behind. Then Juniper made a sound and there it was. Same color as the others except for the front, which looked damp. I could make out shallow grooves where eyes would be on a face if stone could have a face. What stuck with me, though, was the chest. A long vertical split packed full of pale things. Teeth again, more of them, dozens maybe, set deep into the crack like kernels in a cob. I said, "It's just a formation," and even saying it, I heard the lie in my own voice. A piece of gravel clicked by my boot. Then another. The hoodoo stepped forward, not like a person stepping, more like the lower half cracked loose, and the whole thing shifted one grinding inch, then another. Pebbles poured from its sides. One of what I'd taken for ridges on its shoulders lifted and turned out to be an arm folded tight against it. Juniper whispered, "Graham." I don't remember telling her to move, but suddenly we were moving. Not running yet. Fast walking the way people do when they don't want to admit they're fleeing. Behind us, I heard the scrape of stone on stone, slow but steady. I looked back once and wish I hadn't. The thing was no longer shaped like a column. It had leaned forward into something almost human, long-legged, crooked, with red dust falling in streams off its body. The slit in its chest flexed wider, and for one horrible second I thought the teeth inside it were chewing. We broke into a run. The trail switchbacked through loose rock. Juniper nearly went down. I grabbed her camera harness and yanked her upright. The tapping started again all around us now, from ridge to ridge and wall to wall, as if other things were answering it. I tried to tell myself it was rocks disturbed by our running, but the pattern was too deliberate. 3 close, 1 far, 2 behind. At a narrow section where the path hugged the wall, Juniper made a choking sound. I turned and saw red stone fingers curling over the trail edge behind her shoulder. Not the whole thing, just a hand, if that word applies. Thick, jointed wrong, packed with grit. It hooked the back of her backpack and pulled hard enough to rip the side seam open. She screamed then. A real scream, furious more than panicked, and slammed one trekking pole backward. It shattered against the hand. Chips flew. That gave us enough. Instead of staying on the trail, we scrambled straight up a loose slope toward the rim. It was stupid, dangerous. I knew it while I was doing it, but the switchback suddenly felt like hallways designed for whatever was behind us. We went on all fours at points, slipping on red grit, clawing at roots, cameras thumping against our ribs. The air had that metallic before snow taste. My lungs burned. Once, halfway up, I looked back. The thing had stopped below us. It stood among the hoodoos, so perfectly still I almost lost it. Almost. Then I saw the dark slit in its chest open and shut once, and every hoodoo around it seemed to be leaning our direction. We got to the rim near a closed overlook. No dramatic rescue, no ranger truck, just our own car a long way off and the wind picking up hard enough to hurt my ears. We made it there at a stumbling jog. Back at the motel, Juniper dumped her pack on the bed, cursing because a lens filter had cracked. When she pulled the torn backpack around, the back panel had 5 deep indentations pressed into it from the outside. Not cuts, not scratches, rounded dents evenly spaced like stone fingers had gripped and then let go. We kept telling each other maybe it had been a rockfall, maybe a weird formation breaking apart, maybe panic had turned shapes into intent. Then Juniper checked her photos. She had a burst sequence of the gap where we first saw it. 7 shots taken less than 2 seconds apart. In the first 3, nothing but empty space between the spires. In the 4th, a narrow shadow where no shadow should have been. In the 5th, the upper half of that thing leaning into view. In the 6th, closer. In the 7th, so close that the slit in its chest filled the frame, packed with pale human teeth and wet red dust. She deleted none of them. I don't know why. Maybe proof matters even when you don't want it. I haven't gone back below the rim since. I still like high desert. I still tell myself there are explanations for almost everything. But every now and then I'll see old brickwork with bits of shell or stone embedded in it, and my whole back tightens because for half a second it looks like somebody's smiling out of a wall. Story 3. Arches was supposed to be the easy trip. That was the phrase I used when I talked Pavel Duran into going with me. Easy trip. 2 days, 1 night, good weather, not too technical. I'd just come out of a bad breakup and wanted a place so open it could blow all the leftover noise out of my head. Instead, I packed too much trail mix, forgot matches, brought a thrift store sun hat that kept snapping backward in the wind, and managed to get lemon electrolyte powder all through the front pocket of my pack. Normal me, basically. My name's Nomi Calder. I don't spook easily, which I used to think was a strength. We started the Devil's Garden loop late enough to annoy a more organized person. The parking lot was already hot. Pavel wore sandals for the first mile because he said boots were for people who hated their toes, and I spent 10 minutes trying to fix a torn corner on the park brochure because I'm apparently incapable of leaving paper alone. Little things, harmless things. There were other hikers around at first, and that made everything feel ordinary. The farther out you go there, the stranger scale gets. A rock fin looks close until it takes 20 minutes to reach. A balanced stone looks tiny until you stand under it and feel your body understand weight in a new way. We passed a bunch of cairns marking the primitive stretch, and Pavel joked that whoever stacked the first one had accidentally started a religion. I remember one cairn in particular because it was ugly, too squat, too many flat stones in the middle. I actually almost knocked it over and restacked it better, which now feels like maybe the dumbest impulse I've ever had. I didn't touch it, we kept hiking. The first odd thing was that we started finding cairns where neither of us remembered seeing them and not finding ones we knew we had passed. That sounds small, and maybe it was. Maybe people had gone ahead of us and added markers. Maybe we were distracted. I had a blister starting on my left little toe and kept stopping to shake grit from my shoe. Pavel had lost the cap to his water bottle. The sun was bright enough to flatten detail. It was easy to tell ourselves we were just mixing things up. Then we came to a sandy stretch between 2 fins, and there in the middle of the trail sat the ugly cairn. Same flat middle stones. Same slanted top rock with a white vein across it. Impossible to mistake. Pavel frowned. Did we circle already? We didn't, I said. Then somebody's messing with us. That was believable enough that I latched onto it. Another group, some bored prank. Hikers can be weird in parks when they think nobody's watching. I walked around the cairn. There were footprints everywhere in the sand, ours among them, so that told me nothing. I remember there was a crushed green pistachio shell near my boot and a lizard halfway under a rock watching us like we were idiots. Then I realized something that made the skin on my arms tight. There was no shadow under the cairn. Not really. Not correctly. The sun angle should have left a clean little wedge beneath it. Instead, the sand under those stacked stones looked blurred, dimmer than the rest, as if the light was being smudged there. I said it was probably because the ground dipped. Pavel didn't answer. A minute later he said very quietly, "Nomi, don't look fast," which of course guaranteed I looked fast. The top stone of the cairn had turned, not fallen, not shifted under wind, turned so that the white vein now ran vertical instead of diagonal. I laughed. A short, ugly sound. Okay, somebody's there. No answer came from the rocks, no giggling hikers, nothing except the wind hissing over sand. Pavel crouched and picked up a pebble, then dropped it. I don't like this. Neither do I. We backed away, slow at first. I kept my eyes on that cairn because if somebody was hiding behind it, I wanted to see them stand. The moment we passed between the fins and lost sight of it, there came a dry, sliding noise behind us. We both turned. I wish we hadn't. The cairn was coming apart, not falling, but unfolding. One flat stone slid down and became a shoulder. Another tilted outward and became the angle of a hip. A long line of smaller rocks spilled from the middle and arranged themselves into something like a spine. Sand poured off it in silky sheets. When what had been the top stone lifted, I saw beneath it a narrow head coated in red dust, featureless except for a split where the face should have been. Pavel swore once sharply. Then it took a step, and the sound it made wasn't rockfall. It was many pebbles clicking together inside a hollow body. We ran. There isn't dignity in fear. People always tell stories later like they did smart things in the right order. I did not. I left one trekking pole in the sand. Pavel threw his sandals without seeming to notice. I clutched my hat for 3 steps like that mattered, then let it go too. We cut off trail trying to angle toward the more traveled section, but the fins in Devil's Garden turn everything into a maze if you're not careful. Twice I glanced back and saw it between the rocks, not fast exactly, but never needing to hurry. Every place it stepped, small stones jumped as if drawn toward it. Once it vanished completely, and I had the awful hope it was gone. Then I looked to my right and saw a human-shaped bulge pushing out of a sandstone wall, as if the rock there had gone soft for just long enough to let a shoulder and a head emerge. That was the image that stayed with me, not the running, not the panic, just stone making room. We hit a narrow crack between 2 fins, too tight to look useful. Pavel shoved through first, scraping skin off both arms. I got stuck for 1 humiliating second because my pack wedged sideways. I unclipped the straps, let the pack fall, and squeezed after him. Behind me, I heard a rush of pebbles and then a heavy impact against the rock. The whole crack vibrated. Something shoved a hand into the gap after us. 4 thick fingers of stacked stone, jointed with packed sand, feeling blindly. One knuckle brushed the sole of my boot and left a trail of grit that felt weirdly warm. We crab-walked the rest of the way through and came out on the other side into open sun. There were voices somewhere nearby, actual hikers this time, thank God, and that changed something. The clicking behind us stopped. When I dared look back into the crack, I saw only darkness and a little fan of spilled stones at the base, like a collapsed marker. We didn't stop moving until we reached the main trail. Back at the campground, I realized my pack was gone with my stove, food, and map. That should have upset me more than it did. Mostly I sat on the picnic bench staring at my scraped palms while Pavel drank water like he'd crossed an ocean. He kept saying, "It was a person. There's some way that was a person. Then, no, it was. Then nothing." The proof came later when I emptied my boots. One boot had ordinary sand in it. The other had a tight little cluster of flat red stones packed into the toe box, arranged in a curve like knuckles curled into a fist. Not random, not from walking. I tipped them into my hand and dropped them so fast they clicked across the concrete. I didn't tell a ranger. I didn't go back for the pack. Whatever I lost out there was cheaper than being seen again by something that knew how to wait still and pretend to be part of the trail. Story 4. The Needles district of Canyonlands feels older than weather. That's the best way I can put it. Not old like ruins, old like something stripped bare and still standing because it doesn't care what passes over it. I was out there in early spring with 2 people from a contract survey crew, Surrey Kwan and Milo Fenn, checking marker damage after winter runoff. Not glamorous work. Mostly driving rough roads, photographing metal posts, arguing over coordinates, and eating too many salted peanuts because they kept better than fruit. I'm Everett Hale. At the time I was 34 and thought practical experience could outvote any bad feeling if I got enough of it together. We were based out of a little primitive site near an old cowboy camp. First morning, Milo complained his instant oatmeal tasted like drywall. Suri spent 5 minutes trying to get a radio station that never came in. I had a pebble in my boot from the second I put it on and was too stubborn to stop and shake it out until it had rubbed a blister. The truck smelled like dust, gasoline, and the dill pickle chips Milo insisted on bringing everywhere. Regular work trip stuff. We found the old camp around midday. Half-fallen fencing, a rusted ring for tethering stock, one fire pit lined with iron. The map marked no structure there, just a point of historical interest. Suri started taking reference photos while Milo wandered off to pee behind a juniper. That was when I noticed the puddle. Not really a puddle, one of those potholes in the slick rock holding rainwater, dead still, no breeze, a gnat drifting on the surface. Then a ripple crossed it from the center outward. I thought maybe a bug had hit or a drop fallen from somewhere. Then it rippled again, stronger this time, though nothing touched it. I called Suri over because I wanted somebody else to see it and tell me it was normal geology. She knelt beside me, frowned, and said maybe water was feeding up from beneath through a crack. That sounded reasonable, and I grabbed onto it immediately. Then the iron lid over the old fire pit moved, just a little scrape, half an inch. I stood up so fast my knee popped. The lid scraped again, slower this time, turning in place as if someone below it were feeling for weight. Milo came back muttering about cactus spines, and saw our faces and stopped. We all stared. Nobody made a joke. That should tell you how wrong it felt. Eventually Milo said, "Animal." I said, "Burrowing something. Maybe trapped." Still reasonable. Barely. He picked up a stick and nudged the iron ring. The lid lifted from underneath. Not high, just enough for 4 wet fingers to curl over the edge. They were coated in white silt. The knuckles bent backward at the first joint. Milo shouted and fell back hard on his ass. The hand tightened, and for 1 second it held the whole weight of that iron lid one-handed from below. Then a second hand joined it. Then something under the dark shifted. I saw part of a forehead, slick with mud, rising through the gap. We all moved at once. Suri grabbed the field case. I grabbed Milo by the back of the shirt because he was still scrambling in loose gravel. None of us made any plan beyond truck. As we ran, I heard the lid clang aside and a wet, dragging sound behind us, faster than seemed possible for something pulling itself from underground. The truck was maybe 40 yards away. It felt like a mile. I threw myself into the driver's seat and hit the ignition. Nothing, not dead battery, nothing. More like the engine turned once and then seized up against something. I tried again. Same sound. Milo kept saying, "Go, go, go," in a thin voice I barely recognized as his. Suri was turned backward in her seat, looking through the rear window. She said very quietly, "Don't look, just start it." Obviously I looked. It had gotten halfway across the slick rock. The body was narrow and colorless under the mud, the shoulders too small for the length of the arms. It didn't run. It dragged and placed itself in long pulls, elbows opening at impossible angles. Its head kept low, chin almost to stone. What stopped me cold wasn't the face because I only saw part of it. It was the trail behind it. A smooth, wet trench, as if something had been stored down in the earth so long it had forgotten legs were meant for dry land. Then it raised one arm and placed its hand flat on the side of the truck bed. The fingers spread wider than any person's could. I turned the key again. The engine caught so hard the whole cab jumped. I don't know what changed. I don't care. I slammed it into drive and fishtailed us off the rock onto the rough track so fast all the tools in back went clattering. Nobody spoke for a full minute. Then Milo said, "We have to report that." Suri said, "Report what?" And that was the problem, wasn't it? What do you tell somebody? We found a thing under a fire pit. A man made of wet clay tried to climb into the truck. Even in my own head, the words felt flimsy next to what my body knew. We got back to Moab after dark. I remember ordering a cheeseburger and not being able to swallow more than 2 bites. Suri washed mud off her boots in the motel tub without turning the bathroom light all the way on. Milo sat on one bed, staring at the local weather forecast as if it might explain something. I went out to unload equipment from the truck. There were 5-finger trails in dried white silt on the inside of the truck bed, starting at the tailgate and curving toward the back of the cab. Inside, we had shut that tailgate before we ever left camp. I know because I checked it after a cooler nearly bounced out on a washboard stretch earlier that morning. I stood there with the motel ice machine humming behind me, and I understood something I hadn't let myself think in the moment. It hadn't just touched the truck. It had gotten in with us, at least for a little while. Maybe only for a few miles, maybe less, but it had been back there while we drove. I sold my share of that contract 2 months later. Officially, I was burned out on field work. That was true enough. What I didn't say was that I couldn't squat by a campsite fire ring after that without imagining a wet hand lifting from the dark below. Story 5. Capitol Reef feels lonelier than people expect. Maybe because it doesn't have the same reputation as the other Utah parks, or maybe because so much of it looks open until you're out in it and realize openness can hide things just fine. I went there with Beckett Rowe to scatter part of my Uncle Tomas Ibarra's ashes. He'd loved the desert in a stubborn, private way and had asked, very specifically, for somewhere quiet enough that nobody would make a ceremony out of it. So Beckett came because he had a better truck and because I didn't want to do the drive alone. We were close, Beckett and I, but not in any complicated way. He was one of those people who can repair a tire, open a beer, and make fun of you all at the same time. On that trip he brought chili lime pistachios, a cooler with a busted latch he kept kicking shut, and a playlist so old it still had ads baked between songs. I brought my uncle's dented thermos because I couldn't bear leaving it behind, even empty. We spent the first part of the day out near Cathedral Valley, where the road makes you feel like you're driving across another planet's weathered remains. Later, because the light was still good and neither of us wanted to head back yet, we stopped near Old Orchard ground closer to Fruta and walked a little ways along an irrigation line. Not a big hike, just enough to stretch our legs and get away from the truck. The place smelled faintly of wet leaves and old fruit. There were bare branches, some rotting windfall apples from the previous season, water sliding in the ditch with that soft, urgent sound it has. Beckett had a burr stuck to one sock and kept pretending it was attacking him. I remember that. I remember wiping dust off my sunglasses with the hem of my shirt and making it worse. The first odd thing was his voice. He was maybe 20 feet behind me near the truck, and I heard him from up ahead around the bend in the trees say, "Mari, over here." Nobody calls me Mari except people who have known me forever. Beckett did, so I answered without thinking, "What?" The reply came from behind me at the exact same time. "Did you say something?" I turned so hard my neck clicked. Beckett was where he should be, one hand on the ash tin looking irritated. Up ahead, nothing, just bare orchard rows and the ditch. I laughed it off because what else do you do? Sound carries strangely around water. Echoes bounce, trees funnel voices. I'd spent the whole week tired and emotional and already halfway primed to hear things because ashes do that to you. Beckett bought the explanation too, or pretended to. We kept walking. A little later, I saw him standing off to the left in the trees. I didn't panic because, again, Beckett was with me. Same jacket color, same height, same stupid baseball cap. My brain actually tried to solve it as a trick first. Some other guy dressed similarly. Weird coincidence. Then the Beckett beside me said, "Why are you stopping?" I pointed. There was nobody there. I said maybe I'd caught a trunk and branch in the corner of my eye and made a person out of it, which is something humans do. We are pattern machines. We hate randomness. All of that sounded intelligent right up until the third time it happened. That time both of us saw it. Across the ditch, maybe 30 yards away, stood Beckett. Same green jacket, same rolled sleeves, same posture with one shoulder lower than the other. Only not quite. The hands were wrong. The fingers seemed too long or too flexible, tucked oddly against the palms. And when it raised one arm to wave at us, the shadow at its feet lifted a second later. Not with it, after it. I think I made a noise then. Not a word. The Beckett beside me went rigid. "Don't answer that," he said, though neither of us had spoken. The thing across the ditch smiled. Not wide, not exaggerated, just enough that I could see there was something dark in its mouth where tongue should have been. I started to think I understood it then. Mimic, double, whatever word people would use to make it feel smaller, and then I realized I didn't, because it wasn't copying Beckett perfectly. It was doing an impression of him, like someone repeating a joke they only half heard. It stepped down into the ditch without splashing. That broke us. Beckett grabbed my arm and pulled me backward so hard I nearly lost my footing on the bank. We ran for the truck through the orchard rows, branches whipping at our faces. Somewhere behind us I heard boots on leaves. Then I heard another set, slightly off rhythm. Then my uncle's voice, clear as if he were right behind me, saying my full name the way he used to when he was annoyed. I almost turned. Beckett swore and shoved me between two trees. "Don't look at it." Of course, I looked anyway once. It was coming between the rows at an easy walk, still shaped like Beckett from a distance. Closer, the limbs moved wrong, each joint flexing with a little extra give, like green wood that hasn't decided where to snap. The face kept slipping too, not changing fully, just wavering around the features. For one blink it looked like Beckett. For the next it held some thinner arrangement of the same parts, unfinished and deeply wrong. The worst detail was the shadow. It didn't match the body. It lagged half a step behind, raising its arms after the real ones had lowered. We reached the truck and piled in. Beckett jammed the key so hard I thought he'd break it. The engine caught immediately, thank God, because I don't know what I would have done if it hadn't, and he spun us around in a spray of dirt that rattled the undercarriage. Something hit the bed of the truck once as we peeled out. Heavy, but not enough to dent metal. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 miles. Eventually Beckett said, "You heard Tomas, right?" I nodded. "That wasn't him." "No," I said. "I know." We made it back to our motel outside Torrey after dark. My hands kept trembling whenever I stopped moving them, so I unpacked for no reason, repacked, washed my face, checked the ash tin twice. Everything seemed normal until Beckett emptied his jacket pockets onto the dresser. Along with his pocket knife, lighter, and a roll of mints, there was my uncle's watch. Old brass watch, cracked crystal, definitely his. It had been inside the ash tin when we left the truck. I know that because I put it there myself that morning after almost leaving it on the dashboard. Beckett stared at it for a long time. Then he said, "Did you put that there?" I said no. Neither of us touched it again that night. I ended up scattering the ashes somewhere else the next day, farther south, with the sun fully up and the truck engine running the whole time. I didn't use the watch. I couldn't. It sits in a drawer now wrapped in a dish towel, and every once in a while I think about how that thing in the orchard knew just enough to call me by the right name, wear the right face, and reach into something closed without opening it. Not enough to be someone, just enough to pretend. Story 6. I used to think the narrows in Zion were less frightening than the desert trails, because water makes a place feel alive, and alive feels safer than dry. That was before I hiked it in the off-season with a permit window that probably should have made me turn around. I'd had a rough year, and for reasons I still can't explain well, I decided what I needed was to spend a night alone with freezing water up to my calves and canyon walls so high they erase pieces of the sky. My name's Dax Mercer. I'm not dramatic by nature. I'm actually pretty good in emergencies, which is why this story bothers me. I did almost everything right and it still didn't matter. The day started stupidly normal. My neoprene socks smelled faintly like mildew because I hadn't dried them well enough after a previous trip. I had 2 crushed fig bars, a dented silver mug, and a tiny bottle of ibuprofen rattling around in my dry bag. My permit was folded inside a zip pouch with a grocery list I'd forgotten to throw away. At the last parking area, I sat on my tailgate tightening my boots while a raven hopped around trying to inspect my sandwich. Just before I started, a woman named Helene Sayeg, who'd been sorting gear near another vehicle, asked if I was going in solo. I said yes. She gave me a look that wasn't exactly judgment, more like she was taking inventory of whether I seemed sensible. Then she said, "If you hear someone ahead of you who sounds too much like you, stop." I laughed because I thought she was joking. Same mistake people always make with warnings that come packaged casually. The Narrows were cold enough to ache. Every step through the water sent a stab up my shins. Light came down in strips, bright at the top, greenish lower where it bounced off water and stone. I remember a candy wrapper snagged in reeds, a dead branch polished silver by the current, the way my left shoulder strap kept squeaking against my rain shell. I remember feeling alone, but not badly alone. By late afternoon, the canyon had gone quieter. Water was still talking, obviously, but nothing else seemed to move. No birds, no voices carrying around bends, just me and that constant rush at my knees. Then I heard myself cough ahead of me. Short, dry, familiar. I stopped so fast the current shoved against my shins. My first thought was that sound had ricocheted weirdly off the walls. I'd coughed maybe a minute earlier. Maybe it had carried. Maybe another hiker had the same rough little throat clear. Stranger things happened, so I kept going. Around the next bend, I saw a silver dry bag disappear from view. Mine was silver. Actually, to be precise, mine was the exact same battered silver with a strip of black tape near the buckle because I'd repaired it the previous summer. I know because I was wearing it. And yet I saw one just ahead of me swing around the curve at shoulder height, attached to somebody walking my direction deeper into the canyon. I stood there in icy water trying to fit that into any version of reality that didn't insult my intelligence. Maybe another person had the same bag. Outdoor gear repeats. Tape fixes repeat. Human brains overconnect patterns. All true. Then I heard my own voice say from around that bend, "You're fine." Same tone I use when I'm trying not to panic. Not exactly a sentence I say often enough for coincidence. I didn't answer. I climbed out of the water onto a narrow shelf and stood with my palm against cold stone, listening. Nothing. Only water. I nearly turned back right there. The only reason I didn't is because turning around in the Narrows can feel like admitting you're afraid of shadows and echoes. Pride is a terrible trail companion. I rounded the bend slowly. There was nobody there, no second bag, no person, no movement but current folding around boulders. The canyon widened slightly and a shaft of late sun cut across the water ahead. In it, I saw footprints on a muddy shelf where someone had stepped out. My boots. My tread. I stared at them long enough to feel stupid. Then I looked down at my own feet in the water and back at the prints. Same wear on the outside heel. Same little nick in the right sole where I'd sliced rubber on shale months earlier. I told myself out loud, "You stepped there earlier." Except I hadn't. I would have remembered climbing out onto that shelf. Also, the prints were facing deeper in. That was when I finally got scared in the plain animal way, not the intellectual way. The back of my neck tightened. My shoulders felt too high. Every sound seemed to arrive sharpened. I kept moving, but no longer because I wanted to, more because standing still felt like cooperation. It got near dusk fast. Narrow canyons do that. 1 minute there's light, the next everything turns blue and depth starts lying to you. I reached a gravel bar I'd planned to camp near and started setting up with hands that wouldn't stay steady. My lighter slipped twice. The tent pole snagged in its own shock cord. I remember being irrationally annoyed about both things, like if I could just have one piece of ordinary incompetence, maybe the rest of the world would stay ordinary too. Then across the water I saw myself, not in detail, not enough for doubt to become certainty and then certainty become something useful. Just me about 50 feet away, stepping out from behind a boulder into the last strip of light. Same jacket, same pack, same posture, slightly forward from the weight on my shoulders. The reason I knew it wasn't a reflection or some trick was simple. It had no shadow. The light hit everything else on that bank, reeds, rock, driftwood. But where that figure stood, the stone behind it stayed clean and empty. It raised one arm. I don't know whether it was waving or reaching. I didn't stay to parse it. I left the tent half-staked and climbed onto a shelf above the water where there was just enough room to sit with my knees to my chest and my back against stone. I turned off my headlamp. I sat in the dark and listened to the river say the same thing over and over while my body tried to shake itself apart quietly. Sometime in the night, I think after midnight, but I'm not sure, I heard boots in the water below me, slow steps, my pace, my weight. Then a hand slid across the stone beside my ankle. Cold, wet fingertips. I kicked hard and hit nothing. The steps stopped. A moment later, from directly below me, my own voice whispered, "You already passed here." I stayed on that shelf until dawn made shapes honest again, maybe honest enough. When I climbed down, the tent on the gravel bar was still standing. That almost made me cry from relief. Then I saw there were 2 sets of footprints around it, mine and mine again, same tread, same stride. One set circled the tent all night, tight, patient loops. I packed without eating and headed back out. At the trailhead, Helene was there loading gear into her car. She took one look at me and didn't ask what happened. She only said, "Did you stop when you heard it?" I said no. She nodded like I had confirmed something private. Back home, I checked the action camera clipped to my chest strap, mostly hoping it had failed so I wouldn't have to test my memory against anything. Most of the footage was useless. Water, rock, my own breathing. But near dusk, right before I saw the figure, there's a 6-second stretch where the camera pans across the muddy shelf. My footprints are there. Then half a second later, the same prints appear again on top of nothing, deeper in, one after another, as if an invisible version of me is still walking. I've watched that clip twice, not more. I don't need more than that. I still think water makes places feel alive. I just don't confuse alive with friendly anymore. Story 7. Bryce in winter is a different planet. The snow cleans everything up too much. It smooths the red dirt, quiets the campgrounds, turns every dark pine into a witness. I'd gone up there alone for a weekend because I was training for longer trail races and wanted elevation without a crowd. That sounds disciplined and healthy when I say it now. At the time, really, I just didn't want to sit in my apartment and think. I'm Talia Bayard. I talk big when I'm nervous, especially if nobody's around to hear it. The campground was almost empty. I set up near a loop that had maybe 2 other occupied sites way off toward the entrance. My stove flared too high on the first try and singed a corner of my ramen packet. One glove had a split seam I'd been meaning to fix. I found a crushed peppermint under the driver's seat while looking for my headlamp. All ordinary, all welcome. The cold came on fast after sunset. You could hear little cracking sounds from the snowpack settling. I ate at the picnic table in my puffy jacket, watched my breath drift white, and kept telling myself how peaceful it was. Around 9, I heard a soft thump outside the tent, not near the door, near my feet. I froze with the sleeping bag zipped to my chin. Then I rolled my eyes at myself because campgrounds have deer, branches drop, snow slides off things. I waited. Nothing. A minute later, another thump. then a dragging sound, brief and dry, over the fabric fly. I whispered, "Very cool, definitely a raccoon," to nobody. There are no raccoons up there doing what I heard. I knew that even then. I unzipped the bag, grabbed the headlamp, and forced myself to look out the mesh. Nothing but snow and the black shapes of pines. The beam caught my boots outside. A guy lined the corner of the picnic table. I saw no tracks from that angle, but the light was bad and the tent wall had fogged. I told myself it was falling snow from a branch. Then something pressed gently against the side of the tent at shoulder height. Not a whole body, just a rounded shape, firm for 1 second and then gone. The nylon whispered inward and sprang back. I didn't go out after that. I'm not brave in stupid ways. I lay awake listening. Once or twice I heard a little breathy hiss, not animal and not whined either. Sometime toward morning I must have slept. When I unzipped the tent at first light, I saw the snow. All around my tent, in a ring maybe 8 feet out, were impressions like snow angels. Not one, at least 12. Each one had the broad sweep of arms, the suggestion of a torso, the fan of legs, except they were wrong in the details. Too narrow at the shoulders, too long through the body, and where each head should have been there was only a single deep heel mark punched straight into the snow. No footprints led to them, none led away. I stood there in thermal leggings and one sock, mouth open like an idiot, while the cold climbed my calves. I tried sincerely to make sense of it. Drifting snow over old impressions, melt and refreeze doing strange things. Some kind of prank from another camper in the night, though there were no prints to support that and no sign anyone had come close. My rational mind kept producing explanations and my body kept refusing them. I should have packed and left then. Instead, I decided a daylight run would clear my head. That's the kind of mistake that only sounds foolish afterward. I took the Fairyland area trail with micro spikes and a vest pack, planning maybe 6 miles. The morning was painfully bright. Snow squeaked underfoot. My water tube had already started to ice at the mouthpiece. For the first mile, running helped. The body loves a simple job. Then I started seeing dark shapes pacing me through the pines above the trail. Never close, never still long enough for certainty. Just movement between trunks where movement shouldn't be. I slowed, told myself I was catching crows in peripheral vision or branches shifting and my brain turning them into intent because of the tent impressions. A quarter mile later, I heard my own footfalls continue after I stopped. 2 extra steps. Crunch, crunch from the tree line. That turned my hands numb inside my gloves. I said, "Hello," because apparently politeness survives farther into fear than I expected. Something answered by tapping the trunk of a pine 3 times. Not pecking, not snow falling, knuckles, hollow wood. I backed off the trail a little to see better, and that was when I saw it. Part of it anyway, a shoulder-shaped mass behind the trees, matted with pine needles and snow, too dark to be bark, too vertical to be an animal crouch. It leaned just enough that I saw a long arm hanging from it, the hand nearly brushing the ground. Then it slid behind the next trunk without stepping. I ran, not all-out panic at first. Controlled retreat, I told myself. Efficient. I cut pace on the flats, pushed uphill, kept breathing on count. Then the tapping moved tree to tree beside me, always matching speed. 3 knocks, silence, 3 knocks. Once, from very close, I heard a dry whisper like someone exhaling through teeth packed with snow. The trail bent back toward the campground. I could see patches of road through the pines. Relief hit too early. That's what got me. Something hooked the back of my hood and jerked. Not enough to pull me down, enough to spin me half around. My hood cinched tight against my throat, and in that turn I saw it properly for 1 instant. Tall as the low branches. Body draped in black pine needles that clung to it as if growing there. The face almost flat, not featureless, but wrong in arrangement, with the eyes sunk so deep they looked like thumbprints in snow. Its mouth wasn't open. The skin around it was simply split and crusted with white. I tore free, left the hood half inside out, and bolted for the road. I didn't stay on trail. I cut straight through scrub, caught one microspike on a root, nearly snapped my ankle, kept going anyway. The campground bathroom building came into view like a miracle of ugly concrete. I slammed into it shoulder first, yanked the door open, and stayed inside with my back against the tile wall until another camper, bless him,